Hello everyone, welcome back to Old School Eats. I am Old School. Today we're going to be cooking brisket. Brisket is a very popular item. It's gained a ton of prominence through Central Texas. And for me anyway, it was always sort of the goal to be able to replicate the incredible brisket that they're able to get in Central Texas. And for any of you who are in barbecue circles, Aaron Franklin, known as Barbecue Jesus or Brisket Jesus. Franklin's Barbecue is known, but Goldie's and Leroy and Lewis and a bunch of these other great places have produced tremendous brisket. And brisket used to be a cheap cut. You cooked low and slow, and it was a roast, and everyone could get it. Well, now brisket has sort of become, sort of the crown jewel in many ways. A lot of places you'll see brisket chopped up. What that typically means is they overcook their brisket. It's still tasty, makes a great sandwich. But what I always look for in a brisket is fantastic sliced lean. There's two muscles that lay over each other. The lean, or the flat, is obviously more lean. Some people prefer that flavor. And then the point, or the fatty, runs a different direction. The grain runs a different direction. It has a lot more intramuscular fat, a lot more sort of moisture in there, and it's my favorite. And getting both of those cooked just perfectly so they're the right tenderness, but have tremendous flavor, is really part of the goal. Now, one of the things people don't talk about, though, when I got into cooking, there was a lot of discussion about it, was fat cap up or fat cap down. And so when you look at a brisket, and you'll see this later when we're trimming it up, there's one side that has a significant fat cap across it that will trim down to about 1/4 of an inch. And depending on the cooker you use, really will drive the direction you go. There used to be prevailing wisdom that if you left the fat cap up, the fat, as it rendered down, would moisturize the meat. And when I went to Mixon's training, he pointed out, and many others have pointed out since then, that that's not really the way it works. It really is about what you're trying to get as an end product. So then the prevailing wisdom became point the fat cap towards where your heat source was, because it would protect the meat, which made a lot of sense. And for those of us who came up with pellet cookers, whose heat source was from the bottom, as opposed to an offset where it was coming across the top, you got a very different brisket flavor. Good, but not the same as what you get off of an offset smoker that was, sort of predominant in Central Texas barbecue. You didn't get that fat render, that crispy bark that Central Texas barbecue really was able to get. Now, I happen to have two different cookers I use. I have a pellet cooker, a Mixon pellet cooker, and a gravity feed as well. And I tend to like the gravity feed better for beef because I can get more wood flavor than I can out of pellets, no matter which pellets I use. So that's what we'll be cooking these briskets on and these beef ribs on another episode later. So what I've tried to do is sort of go best of both worlds. So I actually do cook fat cap up, and I'll explain that as we're going through the thing. But I do have to trim the brisket, which is going to be the first thing that we get into here, is trimming the brisket. And so I will get that set up, and we will go through trimming. All right, now we're going to talk about seasoning the brisket, which we'll be doing in a little while here. There are a couple of different approaches you can take. The Central Texas approach is salt and pepper, and the purists will tell you that's it. There are some great cooks out there. You guys know all the people. Lowry seasoned salt has worked into this many times. Slap your daddy, slap your mama. I can never remember the catchphrase there. But during the Pitmasters run to fame with Mo Cason and Mixon and all these guys and Tuffy, use celery salt or celery seed in his rubs. So everyone's got their own little style, and you can follow your own course. I'll go over the seasonings we use here, but the important part is, for what we're doing today, is we're going to dry brine. Now that we've got the brisket trimmed up, I'm going to season it up. I'm going to put it in a rack, in a pan, in the fridge, let it go overnight. Let that salt pull moisture out of the brisket and then get absorbed back in. This is the way I do it. I don't know that there's a tremendous amount of science behind it. I know that there are people that do different styles, but I always try and season my barbecue the day before, especially a big cut like a brisket, so that flavor can get pulled back into the meat. I also put my meat on cold. I don't let it get to room temperature. I think I get a better smoke absorption this way. I'd love to know, Jeremy Yoder, Mad Scientist Barbecue is fantastic. A lot of these guys run tremendous tests. I think Guga has actually run some tests to show absorption as well. But that's what we're going to do with regards to seasoning. And we're going to be doing two briskets. One brisket we're going to do with salt, pepper, and Lowry's. And the other one we're going to do with salt, pepper, and Cosmo Q's cow cover. I'm a huge fan of Cosmo Q's seasonings and sauces. And their cow cover is fantastic. And they recently came out with a coarse cow cover, which I think is also fantastic. That's my normal flavor profile. So we're going to do my normal flavor profile on one brisket. and then the Lowry's on the other brisket and see where it takes us. Now, we talked a little bit about fat side up or fat side down, or fat cap up or fat cap down. And I talked about the fat rendering. And I think probably the one who does this best in his videos is Mad Scientist Barbecue, Jeremy Yoder. And when I started, just like many of you who are starting, I used about 1,000 probes. I have a technology background, so more technology was better. The longer you cook, the more you get to sort of feel how things are going. I remember watching a video at Goldie's and watching Goldie just touch the cooker with her hand and know how the temperatures, what they were. But what I'm trying to accomplish with my gravity feed is to get enough of the render on that fat cap to get all of that fat cap rendered down till it's just that caramelized yellow fat and it's crunchy bark. And then I'm going to go to the approach that other large barbecue places have gone. And I know that my friend Christian, Mad Cat Barbecue, does this with a Vivor. I know Jeremy does it as well. I'm going to use my actual oven. I'm going to hold the brisket, hot hold it in 150 degrees with a little bit of humidity for 10 hours so that we don't make that bark moist. So that's really the goal we're going after today. We're going to try and get after the brisket's trimmed up, seasoned up, sit in the fridge overnight, get it on the cooker. We'll start it at about 250, let that go, and then we're going to cook it all the way through as long as it takes. And ideally after that hot hold, be able to have an incredible product. One of the things I mentioned was injecting. And when it comes to barbecue or any kind of cooking, you can always inject the meat to try and drive moisture or flavor. Fat is flavor, as Sam the cooking guy says, and other people have too. I don't think he coined that phrase. But when I went to class in Unadilla, we learned an injection method where Myron uses a combination of Miner's au jus beef prep and beef base, and then injects that into the brisket for competition. Now, this isn't a competition brisket we're doing, and I find that while that is fantastic, it's messy and kind of a pain in the backside. So we won't be injecting, but if you do inject, you can get creative with the injections. You can use beef consomme, you can build your own injection. It really doesn't matter. You're trying to get that flavor into this big muscle. And to be honest, I don't notice a big difference. Now, if you're going to competition and someone's only going to get one bite of your brisket, I get it. You want that perfect bite. I find that for brisket, if you're eating it for home, if you want to be king of the cul-de-sac, it's just not necessary. So we won't be injecting. I've seen plenty of people do it, but we will talk a little bit about how we cook this and how we keep things moist. That's going to be one of the focus areas, and that's where you get into the discussions about, and there are some great videos out there of wrap, no wrap, paper wrap, foil wrap. We're not even talking about hot and fast, which is a style of cooking briskets where you go to higher temperature faster versus lower and slower, which is the traditional method. So at this point, we're going to get the trimming going. We're going to get you some footage on that, get that brisket trimmed up, get it seasoned up, and get it resting in the refrigerator. Heat out of there. You want to just get the fat, but it has a natural seam that if you go along, you can usually do a good job of getting just the fat. Now, if you're wondering where the fat's going over here, I just have a waste bowl. I don't remember who I stole that little trick from, but it comes in handy. If you get silver skin, you're lucky because you can actually peel it all the way down. You don't want to pull a bunch of the meat off. And my board moved a little bit. And I do not spend a tremendous amount of time on this effort. But I do want to take this, you may not be able to see, I'll lift it up for the B-roll. There's some oxidation. Apparently this happens during processing. I always take it off. I don't know that it's a big deal, but I take it off. The other guy that there's some great trimming videos out there by guys who've worked in actual restaurants and done this for a profession, as opposed to me. And Chud's Barbecue does a great job. Bradley Robinson. He does his Chud scrape and all that sort of stuff, and they become very proficient at it. I am not, but what I do is good enough for what I do. So, got some really weird thin area over here. Now, a lot of times you hear people talking about making the brisket aerodynamic. I believe that is far more an issue for people that are using an offset cooker where that airflow is a big deal. I am not, so it's not as big a deal for me. The one thing I will say about your trim on the brisket, as it were, is you don't want to create big gaps. Because what will happen is, as that brisket's cooking and it's pushing its moisture out, you'll get pooling, and that will screw up your bark, which you really do want. Now, if you're going to go ahead and wrap in aluminum foil and destroy the bark anyway, probably doesn't matter. Now, as that fat layer goes down, that's going to be in every one of your slices, which is one of the reasons why I see people trying to take that off. So I am going to try and carve most of that out using this fillet knife. I am definitely in the same camp as many others. Just get a decent fillet knife from Amazon and use it until it doesn't work for you anymore. This is very thin. I don't know if you can see it on the camera there. So I'm going to take that around the corner. I do have a meat grinder, and so I will be reusing this. And I also will be using the fat that I cut off of this as the tallow that I wrap it in. Now, one of the other tricks that, I don't know who it was, I saw do it the first time. You really want to know the grain of the meat, because when you cut your brisket, when you cut anything really, you want to slice against the grain. So when it's cold like this, you can see the grain really well. When it's cooked, it's a lot harder. So maybe it was Mo Cason, I don't know. But he cuts either a notch. Now, you know, the butcher has already cut this notch, which is annoying. But my grain here is running this way on the flat. So I'm actually going to make sure that I'm rounded on this side so that it becomes obvious when it's cooked. And then I'm going to cut flat across this last piece, so I know when I take my slices, I want to take my slices like this. Now, a lot of folks, when they're doing their videos now, well, actually, they've been doing it for a long time, they cut right down the middle, do that stacked view that everyone seems to like so much. People, when they cut their cooked brisket, they cut right across the middle, which gives you a little bit of both. You get that cool fat layer and the rain down, and people squish it for reasons I don't quite understand. But really, what you want to do is be able to slice your flat and your point properly to cut against the grain of the meat. And again, you know, I happen to be a point guy. Not everybody is. It is definitely fattier, but I think that there's a lot more flavor in it. That point meat, as you probably know, is where burnt ends come from. I don't know the actual, if there's a legal definition, that's probably the wrong word. Traditional, formal, maybe that's better, definition for burnt ends. But there seems to be some liberal application of the phrase burnt ends. You can do pork belly burnt ends now, which are delicious, mind you. Burnt ends have turned into just be squares of a protein that are cooked, you know, to a very soft, tender level, and quite often sauced. I don't know that I care to do much more with this brisket. It's my first time trimming on camera, and to be honest, I don't know that there's a whole lot more that I need to do. And like I said, there are plenty of people who are far better at trimming than I am. Now, I am super not pleased with this. This is going to be a pool, right? I also want to take this nugget off the top. Now, I grew up in a trailer in Central Florida. I don't like wasting anything, especially something as delicious as brisket. Now, because I'm going to grind this, it's not really waste, but I want to make sure that we're using as much of this as we can. And so it kills me to cut, especially point meat. But this is going to pool if I don't give it away out. So I've got to take that down a little bit and give it away out of the brisket. So that gash is annoying, but not a thing I can do about it. So now we'll flip it over to the other side. I will grab a paper towel. This was frozen, so this is still very, very cold. And trimming while it's cold is actually an advantage for you. So don't shy away from that. But looking at the side, you can see how thick that fat is. So I'm going to bring that back to me. I'm going to work all the way down. All the way down. Probably should have wet a towel. That's one of the tricks to have your board not move. I'm using these throwaway boards because this isn't cooked meat. So this, they call it the tomahawk. It's going to come off. And this is all just hard fat that will not render. So try and take that down as far as I can without getting all the way into the meat. I'm sure someone out there is going, my God, he's cutting towards his hand. Yes, and I am using a saw motion, which is also not great. But I am not classically trained in any of this stuff, so I'm just doing the best I can. And knock on wood, I've yet to hurt myself. So go ahead and round that out on the back end. Now, on this side, yeah, that board moving is annoying. We still got a little bit more that I want to take off here, so we'll try and take some of it off. The standard has been, at least in the videos that I've seen, 1/4 of an inch. This side is actually very good. Let's see what this looks like underneath. That fat does not look bad to me. I will take that piece off on the side, but this side's a little too thick, so I'm going to continue to work on it a little bit. I think that bump will render just fine. You know, one of the things that Myron teaches is everywhere you cut is a place for moisture to get out. And a bunch of the guys who I've watched and followed, and just like you probably come up learning from, talk about the fact that you can spend way too much time cutting a brisket. Right now I'm getting my ass kicked by this brisket because it's slipping all over the board and I don't want to get my other hand dirty. That top side looks fine. That looks good. This, I want to get some of this fat out. I'll show you from the other side in a second. I'll flip it around. I need to sharpen this knife. This is actually good for where I'm at. So I'm going to use this brisket as it is. I'm going to get it into the pan. I'm going to get it seasoned up, and then we will go from there. All right, we're back. We're going to be seasoning this brisket. I've got it in a bus bin. My friend Carrie makes fun of me. She'd done some work in the service industry. Bus bins are these big gray bins. They're different colors. I find it an easier way to keep things clean, and my wife would kill me if I did not do that. I did not already pre-mix my seasonings, and I should. So I will do the annoying thing of walking around my kitchen and grabbing a deli. So the typical ratio is 2-to-1, coarse ground black pepper to kosher salt. 16 mesh is what all the cool people say. I know that you can get really particular about your seasonings. I get mine from Amazon, Spiceology, coarse ground black pepper. And I use Diamond Crystal kosher salt, but I just I reused this shaker. Now we're gonna do 2 briskets. This one that I'm seasoning now will be the new one, which is the one with Lowry's, which is right here. Lowry seasoned salt. You're probably very familiar with it. But I'm going to go 2-to-1 on black pepper and salt. The only other thing I'm going to do because I actually like a very pepper forward crust. I don't know who it was who said it the other night, but they said, oh, it was the gentleman from Leroy and Lewis. He actually said to put pepper on first because the salt crystals are so large they can cause the pepper to deflect. I have no problem with a heavy pepper flavor, so I'm actually going to put a little bit of pepper in here to begin with and get that on the brisket. As you can tell by using this bus bin, it's pretty damn easy, and you don't end up chasing, seasoning for 2 weeks, which is good. I have dogs in the house, and they find seasoning fascinating, as you can imagine. And I'm just getting a light coating of the pepper on here just to get it right onto the brisket itself. Now I've got here by sight 2-to-1 coarse ground pepper. So I'm gonna mix that up. Take the little lid. This is where having a camera person would be useful. Trying to do this all solo is proving to be complicated. So there's our 2-to-1 coarse ground black pepper and salt. And this is on the fatty side, which hopefully the B-roll is embedded in this video and you can see it. As Chud says, make sure you mind the sides. Now I'm going to come back again and get the Lowry's on here. Again, with the bus bin, the advantage I have is all of the extra is kind of just piling up around this brisket. And so I can grab it from the sides and just shake it back onto the brisket. This, like many things in barbecue, in my opinion, is far more art than science. I do like a seasoning heavy flavor. I know there are some cuts where folks like to focus on the flavor of the actual cut of meat, which I can totally buy. But with brisket, you're gonna get that anyway. It's a giant piece of protein. And so I think we're gonna be just fine. Now I'm gonna go in with the Lowry's. Try and make sure I don't get that thing filthy. This is the first time I've used Lowry's. It is a much smaller grind, I guess is the right word. And I'll talk about that a little bit because it makes sense. On the other brisket that I'm doing, I normally would have done this side second, but that's going to be okay. The other brisket I'm using Cosmo Q. I think I mentioned it earlier in the video. I love Cosmo's seasonings. I love the sauces. Their stuff is fantastic. My wife has an issue with MSG. I do not have that same blood feud with MSG, but she does. And as her opinion on this stuff matters a great deal, I try to avoid it at all costs. I know that's going to make Uncle Roger upset, but I'm not making fried rice. I also saw recently there was a study done that seems to imply that the anti-MSG fad was more marketing than reality. Now I noticed when I pulled this up, you can probably see it on the B-roll, that I missed some of the point down here, and I don't like that. So I want to make sure I get some seasoning down here. Let that tack up a little bit, flip it over, pat it up, and that's going to be good. Now on the other brisket, like I mentioned, Cosmo Q had cow cover, right here on the B-roll, and then they just came out with this coarse cow cover, specifically for briskets. And I've used both, and they're both fantastic. So I'll do this brisket with this salt, pepper, and Lowry's blend. Then I'm gonna go ready the other brisket. You only see another novice trim job. I'll get that trimmed up. I'll get it seasoned up. Same thing, the salt, pepper, 2-to-1, and coarse cow cover. We'll be doing both of those briskets in this cook. So see you right after that. On the gravity feed, we talked about it before. This is a coal chute. I use lump coal. One of the differences about this cooker, and it may well be about other cookers, I don't know, It has a round chute, which should stop this jamming that can occur in some gravity feed cookers. I've never had a problem with that. As the coals burn down, there's a grate at the bottom down here in this box, and the embers fall through that, igniting the wood, which creates the smoke. You need that to be a free flow. As the cooker cooks, the charcoal burns down. We're going to need to put some more charcoal in the top. That is definitely warm. I'm going to load that up. This is going to be a long cook. Oh, easy now. There we go. That's a big guy. That's not going to work. All right. Get that locked back down. The Fireboards has this at about 200 in the back. We did notice that there's about a 50-degree delta between the temperature gauge on the front and the Fireboard in the back where it was below the ribs. I would expect those two to sort of come together over time as the meat inside the cooker comes up to temperature. But for right now, we just know that going forward. The other thing I'll probably do while I'm doing this, since we're already handy, no, I'll do it later. I'll add some more wood to the bottom. That gives you the wood flavor. There are many people who argue that that's not true, that the charcoal flavor is what you're really getting. I happen to think it helps with the flavor. I could be wrong. All right, here we are in the outdoor kitchen for Old School Eats. We've got our briskets sitting here nice and cool, having sat in the refrigerator overnight, allowed this flavor to hopefully get into the meat. As I mentioned in the trim and seasoning section of the video, I did not inject these. I just went ahead and trimmed them up and seasoned them and then put them in my outdoor refrigerator to allow them to dry brine overnight. I've got them on racks here. I will put them on in the cooker on the racks as well, so that when I take them out, if I decide to pan them, they're not going to sit down in their own fluids. Now, this is going to be another game time decision, folks. I'm not a pro at this. One of the things you've seen on the internet is there's a lot of discussion about brisket unwrapped, which is sort of what many people call the Goldie's approach. Foil boat, which Bradley Robinson from Chud's Barbecue sort of has pioneered. And then panned, which is how I was taught by Myron Mixon. I don't know from a science or gastronomy perspective that there's any real difference between panned and foil boat. It protects the bottom of the brisket. It allows it to braise its own juices. If you put it on a rack in the pan, which is what I was taught to do, that keeps the meat out of the fluid, but it allows it to braise because of the steam coming up from the bottom. They're all fine methods. What I'm trying to do in this video, though, is to emulate or replicate the Central Texas bark. So unlike normal, where you would put the fat cap towards your heat source, which in my cooker that we're using today is the bottom, I have the fat up. So they're going to go on the rack, just raw, getting that nice hot air for probably, I'm going to guess, 6 to 7 hours. And I'm not going to really go, a lot of times you go to 165 and then you wrap them. And again, because I have a technology background, I wanted everything to be specific. What I found out is it's not specific. I'm going to be checking that bark, seeing the fat render, making sure that we're not getting crispy, crunchy, dry out on the meat side. If I do, I'll spritz it a little bit. But these are really good briskets. They're prime briskets. There's plenty of fat. They should be fine. As soon as that fat gets to rendering, or I get to some of that caramel yellow fat render, then I'm going to make the call. Whether I go with the foil boat a la Bradley Robinson, or whether I just pop them in the pan and then let the rest of it cook that way and take it all the way up to close to 195-ish, because I plan on hot holding these briskets. And I'll talk more about hot holding in a minute, but essentially this is keeping the briskets in a 150-degree humidity-controlled environment. A lot of folks talk about Alto Sham, which is what commercial kitchens use. Vivor has one that I know has become all the rage as of late. My oven happens to have a setting like this, and I can put a water pan in it. And I'm going to hold those briskets for about 10 hours and let them continue to break down the intramuscular fats. So that's the plan. We're going to get these guys on the cooker and let them roll. All right, we're going to bring our briskets over to our gravity feed cooker. If you guys watched the beef rib video, you'll actually notice the beef ribs are on this cooker because we cooked them all at the same time. There's no point heating up your cooker and not using the space, which is something that seems logical to me. My wife is not as big a fan of that approach because I end up with things like 2 briskets and 2 racks of beef ribs that we then eat for the next 4 weeks. That brings up a topic we'll have in another video, which is how wonderful a sous vide is with a vacuum sealer and what it can do for barbecue. But I digress. The gravity feed cooker, A lot of detail in the other video. Shoot, charcoal burns down, hits the wood in the bottom, gets us that wood flavor. It's not the same as a offset smoker. You traditionalists out there, I love you. I love that you love tending your fires. I don't have that propensity yet, though I did joke with my friend Malcolm, who's here actually doing my camera work today, that there's plenty of room to put an offset cooker out here somewhere. So who knows what's going to happen in the future. But for right now, we're going to get these briskets on here, and I've got them marked. I've got a toothpick in the one that is my traditional flavor profile, which is the Cosmo Q cow cover with salt and pepper, versus the Lowry's, which is the, I guess, Leroy and Lewis approach that we're going to be emulating today. So we're going to get these on the cooker right away. Like I mentioned, we're going to put these on these racks. And in there, and I'm going to use the pan that was in right underneath it to catch anything that comes through. That does a couple of things, not the least of which keeps my cooker a little bit more clean. But you can also strain that stuff and make fantastic jus, which I tend to do. And when I have all that extra, actually, while I'm in here, I want to show something else. There's a water pan down here. I can't get it with this hand. Let me grab mine, stay on there on the camera. Grab something that'll allow me to heat. So in this cooker, there is a static, what I'll call static water pan. Looks pretty gross, but that's water. And that's right above the heat source. So that's going to keep the humidity in the chamber up where I need it to be. Myron has, and other people have, H2O cookers or water cookers that have float switches in them, and they keep a constant level of water to keep your humidity where you want it to be in the cooker. The reason for that is that temperature is maintained in humid air better than dry air. It's why your oven in your kitchen, while you say it's 325, if you put an ambient probe in there, that's going to go from 275 to 350, right? Because it's turning it on, heating it up, and then going down. Water cookers are fantastic. Water pans are the next best thing. So I have a water pan in my gravity cooker, and that's what's in there. So we're going to let these guys go. We'll monitor them in about 4 hours and see what's going on, and keep putting wood into the gravity cooker and see where we end up. This thing rocked right back up to just over 250, even after checking the briskets and the ribs and loading more coal into the chute. I'm going to open her up. This lower brisket had gotten about 10 or so degrees further than my upper brisket. Sure looks pretty good though. The upper brisket, move them down. My suspicion is if you're in an offset, this is less of an issue because you're all at the same level. But as you can tell, it wasn't super hard to do that. Drip pans are still in place. Everything else is good. We'll temp those again in about another hour. We were sitting 145 and 135. I suspect that'll go up another 10 degrees. As we mentioned earlier, when we're talking about briskets, I do not plan on wrapping these guys. So the 165 area is not a big deal, but until we get there, we're not going to get the kind of render you saw in that gash in one of them. That fat was nowhere near rendered. It's still very white, so we need that heat to get in there. We need that dry air to come through. Yes, I know I've got a water pan in, and you'd say to yourself, if you want dry air, why are you putting moisture in there? I don't want real dry air. I want humid air, but I need that air flow to go through and render that fat down. So we'll take a look in about another hour to 2 hours and see where we're at. It's been about 3.5 hours, almost 4. Temperature is fantastic on the cooker. We've been rocking about 250. Just put some more wood chunks in here. For briskets of this size, I'm going to expect them to require about 10 or 11 hours at the temperatures we're cooking at. But because we're going to use, and we talked about this earlier in the video, I had said foil boat, pan, I've kind of waffled back and forth. In the interim, I went in and watched a video from Leroy and Lewis where they talked more about the foil boat method and the benefit of having that foil crumpled up around the outside of the brisket. And since I've never really done that before, I've cooked briskets countless times in a pan before, I think we're going to actually use the traditional foil boat and not use the pan method that I talked about. But we're going to check temperature right now to see how they're doing. If you recall, we moved the brisket from the bottom to the middle because it was about 10 degrees ahead. I would expect they'd normalize now, but we'll find out. There's that big gash that always pisses me off. We're 155 here, 157 on the flat. That fat's not rendered yet, it's still white, but it's cooking nicely here, it seems to be. Got a little pooling up there I'm going to want to dump out. 157, 158. So they have normalized, which is what we expected. It's not enough pooling to care about. So I would normally try and dump that out, but it doesn't seem to be causing any problem. It's fine. Put that back in. So at this point, what we've got to do is let the cooker do its thing and keep cooking. 160, 165 is where historically, like when I started cooking, that was always the number. You get to 165, you wrap, you go to 203. That was the just add water science model that an old computer geek would have used because that's how we were taught to do it. As it turns out, it's a little bit more art than science there. You definitely want to get up in that 160 range, but we want that fat to render. Now, it's not rendering at the pace you get in an offset because you don't have that much convection, I think, in this kind of a cooker. So I don't have the crunchy bark that I want. That's one of the reasons we're doing this experiment with the foil boat, because I want to leave that fat cap side completely uncovered all the way up into that 200 point so that we can try and render that fat down on the top. So I would guess in another 10 to 20 degrees of push up, then we're going to go boat them, put them back in there, and then let this thing go. We can crank the temperatures up a little bit because we'll be protecting that more delicate meat on the bottom that doesn't have the fat protecting it. And then we'll get it all the way up to where we want to be. We'll take them off, wrap them, and put them in the holding oven. All right, we're back. As you can tell, it's dark now. I got a little bit of a late start, which we talked about earlier. But the brisket, one of the briskets is actually ready to be boated. The other one's not. So my top brisket is at about 168, 169. We're going to do a foil boat. It's the first time I've done foil boat, so you're going to see it first here. And then once the other brisket gets up to that temperature, it's about 158. So in theory, I could do it, but I wanted to get another about 10 degrees before we boat that one. So let's take a look in here and see what we got going on. Right. Get my thermometer. $170 there, 161 there, but we've got the render that we want, or the beginning of the render that we want there. I'm going to actually check the other one real quick while we're in here, because I may have gotten it backwards in my narrative here. No, this is the one that's a little bit behind, which is interesting because it's lower. So we'll take this one out, do this foil boat. Drain off a little bit of that pool. There we go. Back out. Retain that heat. Now, I watched the video on this earlier. It appears to be very scientific. Essentially, we're just building this little boat around our brisket. And if you remember earlier in the video, we talked about, well, why do this versus a pan? And the idea here is really just to protect the crust. We are getting a nice bark here. We got a little bit of cooling there. I don't know if you can see on the camera. Hopefully you can. But we're going to go back in here with this boat and take this the rest of the way. Foil boat one done. We'll give this some time, get that other brisket up to temp, boat that guy, and then take these the rest of the way, all the way through. And then we'll talk about holding oven inside a little bit later. All right, we're back out in the outdoor cooking space. My neighbors are probably annoyed at this point. We've got the second brisket, should be about where we want it to be to put it in the foil boat. The first foil boat worked out surprisingly well. It wasn't complicated at all. So we'll get this one foil boated, and then I'm going to put probes in. I'm using, I think I mentioned on the video before, Fireboard. And while I do say that as you cook more, you use probes less, for this, especially going late, I'm going to want to keep an eye on these briskets. When they get up around 200 degrees, somewhere between 200 and 205, I want to take them out and let them get to about 170 degrees, just sitting out in the, on the counter essentially, and then I'll put them in the warming oven. But right now, let's make sure we're where we need to be, and then get this thing boated up. Temperature's where we want it, which is great. Got a little bit of pooling in here that I'm going to dump out into the pan. One of the things that happens when you cook more often is you get less concerned about moving the meat around. Sounds a little bit weird to say. This looks really good. Got a really good crust going, which is what we wanted. Get this foil boat folded up. Got it nice and encased in that heavy-duty aluminum foil. A little bit of pooling there, but I drained most of it. Should be fine. This is the one with the toothpick, which means it is my traditional seasonings. We talked about that earlier. Now all I have to do, put them back in, get my other probe, fish it through. Now we will monitor those temperatures remotely from our Fireboard app and handle it the rest of the way. So thanks, and we'll come back later with the warming oven time. All right, so this is brisket 1, which was the one on the bottom rack. Brought in, it's still in its foil boat. I drained a little bit of the additional tallow that was collected along the bottom. I've got it in the drip pan. Gonna let this sit here till about 170 degrees and then put it in the holding oven. It's sitting at about 204. The bark is fantastic. So far, I'm very pleased with what I've got from a render perspective. The other brisket's about 8 degrees behind. We'll get in here, get it cooled off, and then put it in the holding oven, and then we'll be back tomorrow morning to talk about it. When you think about the ribs, I did say I was going to cook them no wrap. They're still not wrapped. What I'm going to do, instead of trying to eat them at about midnight, is I'm going to, once they're to temperature, take them off, wrap them just in butcher paper with a little bit of tallow, to put in the holding oven, and we'll try those at the same time. All right, we've got our 2 briskets. This was an all-day cook yesterday. We went all day and tried the foil boat method, which is a Leroy & Lewis original. Apparently Chud got it from Leroy & Lewis. As you can see, if the cameraman can pan in, there's a little bit of tallow down there in the bottom. Got a nice bend on these guys. They were in the warming drawer overnight.
Oh my God.
So here we have brisket 1. I just poured some of the tallow out from the foil boat. We'll do the obligatory cut down the middle. Wow. Moisture looks great. Smoke ring looks great. Flat side. Let's see what these burn ends look like. We definitely got the bark we're looking for. I will say that some of the outside edges are a bit crunchier than I would like, but oh boy. Gotta reward the cameraman.
Yo, go. All right.
So about that crunchy thing, not an issue. This experiment was all about getting Central Texas bark off of my gravity feed smoker because I don't have an offset. So I went with a very different cooking approach than I normally do to get that bark. Also did the overnight hold. This is the point meat. You can see, super well rendered. All right, well, point's easy. It's fatty. It's delicious. Let's see what we got on this guy. That's a thick slice. Oh, not much bend on that. Pull part's good. Very tight. Very tight. Flavor's good. I'm wondering if I just... There we go. That's better. It's too early. Pull apart's great. This, that yellow fat is what we're looking for. Here you go, Nick. Oh, it's going to be a bite.
Thank you. Oh, that's real, bro. Oh my god. Bro, I'm talking too much.
All right. So, I'm going to slice the rest of this brisket up. But I think for right now, the takeaway, when you get into the slices of significant size, I guess I was being a little bit arrogant coming down here on a 3-inch slice and trying to get bend. But that bark, and Nicholas has never had it in Texas, but I have. That's a win. Both of these experiments were wins. I'm going to slice the rest of this brisket up, feed all my friends and family. Hopefully you guys are doing the same thing out there, trying to become the king of the cul-de-sac, as Myron Mixon says. If you like this video, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, give me comments. Novice cook, having fun with my sons and my friends, sharing what I know and trying to learn from you guys. Looking forward to the next video, and I'll talk to you soon.